Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, listeners. This is your host, Andy Curry. Welcome to the show today. I have an exciting program for you today because I have on the line with me Holly Green, who has been speaking for 10 years professionally. The content she speaks on is fascinating. It's based on the brain, how and why we think and behave. I'm excited to hear about this. Holly speaks in the U.S. and internationally. She has written 2 books, the first one called More Than a Minute. The second one is Using Your Brain to Win. So, Holly, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
We're excited to have you. I like the title of that second one, Using Your Brain to Win, boy. I'm going to have to hear about that.
It is an amazing tool.
Oh, yes, it is. Well, let's talk about your speaking business for a little bit. Who are you talking to? What are you teaching them?
Well, all sorts of audiences of just about every shape and size. So I speak at associations, conferences, corporate meetings. I do speak with nonprofit groups in every industry you can imagine, everything from pest control to healthcare to high tech, the Microsoft Global Partner Conference, you name it, all over the world. And it really helps keep me on my toes because I'm usually speaking to an incredible audience of business owners, leaders, senior executives, etc. Okay.
And is your talk with these folks always about the brain normally?
Pretty much. My undergraduate degree is a BA in BS. So I started with behavioral sciences, got a master's of science in organization development, and my postgraduate work is neurophysiology. And the reason I went into that field is because I'm just absolutely fascinated by how and why we think and behave the way that we do at work. And why is it when we're sitting in meetings, we look around and we think, wow, obviously this group did not read Management 101. People are not behaving logically or rationally. This is not helpful. We're not progressing things, etc. And it really got me very interested in this thinking and adult thinking, but mostly functional adult thinking, and how we can leverage that much more effectively in the workplace.
Okay. So let's talk about what you're teaching people then. Let's when people say, "Hey, can you come talk and let's talk about the brain?" What is your presentation like? What are you saying?
Well, there are all sorts of variations on the theme. So there's everything from how to use your brain to much more effectively communicate and influence and negotiate with other people. We call that one exposing yourself, legally and appropriately, of course. So how do we expose our own thinking process and really loop others in more effectively to our brain? How do we expose their thinking so that we can align and move together towards whatever it is we're trying to achieve? We also talk a lot about our brain as applied to innovation. How do we think differently? How do we change perspective, challenge assumptions, think outside the box, if you will, use visuals to stage ourselves for success, question the right answer. So we've got about a series of about 99 different neuro prompts, ways to visit our brain in a matter of moments, some of them as short as 30 seconds to do, some of them take all the way up to 3 whole minutes. So that we're really using that brain of ours much more effectively. We're actually slowing down. We say pause, think, and focus. So how do we slow ourselves down just enough to actually visit and use the brain that we carry around with us anyway?
Pause, think, and focus. I like that. And you said
we're in a world that has just stripped that away. We run from the moment we wake up until we go to bed at night, and we've stripped away a lot of the thinking processes that have helped us to be so insanely successful just as a species over time. And we've replaced it with these just to-doing, reacting, and not being near as intentional as we're capable of being.
So how do we be more intentional?
Well, it is about building that pause back in, setting ourselves up to be successful in doing that. Sometimes it's as simple as asking our brain or prompting our brain with a what-if question. What if I'm wrong? What if my customer sees this differently? What if it's possible too? So there's focusing on a target, spending 3 minutes at the beginning of every day and, saying, what is winning today? What does that equate to? What does it look like at the end of the day when I've really made progress? Others around me have been successful. And how will I make sure to organize my day around that? How will I do the things that contribute to progressing us forward versus just the distractions that keep me running in circles? So it could look like 1,000 different things depending on what you need and what would be most effective to set yourself and others up to be successful.
Well, it sounds, excuse me, I got a scratchy throat today. It sounds like then that we have to make it a habit to ask ourselves questions like that first thing in the morning.
Yeah, not only first thing in the morning, throughout the day. There are times when we should be saying, okay, gosh, why are we doing this the same way we've always done it, the same way everyone else in our industry does it? Let's take a look and see, are there other industries that do something similar that we could learn from? So, it really throughout the day, there are simple practices that we can use. Challenging assumptions. Gosh, we're at a negative place. We're assuming the worst of a scenario or a product launch or a customer or something else. And what if they really aren't out to get us? What if this can work out well? What would I think then? What would I do? What would I see? So it really can look like almost all the time there's an opportunity to visit and play with our brain just a wee bit.
Challenging assumptions, I would think, would be one of your biggest topics because we live our lives based on assumptions, don't we?
We do.
So
it is, and it's instinctual as well, and we have to have them about a lot of things. When you walk across the floor, you expect the floor to hold up. You assume it will remain steady and level, etc. So we make them about literally thousands and thousands and thousands of things every single day. The problem is we tend to over-rely on them at work. We certainly make them about other people, their intentions, how they're thinking, what they're thinking, etc. And so that one's a tough one. When we talk about the brain, particularly, we really focus on the thinking process. You go through several steps in thinking to get all the way to your behavior. In the middle of that is layering on assumptions. And so we're trying to teach people when that comes in and what you can do at those moments when you find yourself in what we call a negative thought bubble. How can you learn to think about what you're thinking about? And so that when you do that, you're able to question it effectively. You're able to more effectively question and understand others. So again, it all goes back to this kind of being intentional and really understanding what's going on inside that brain of yours. Again, many times serving you very well, but also more and more the faster we go, maybe not serving you quite as well as it could.
So what are the techniques you give people to help them to remember throughout the day to be intentional?
Well, we really try to create some prompts, so things that will trigger in your brain, okay, wait a minute, we're doing that thing again, right? So one of those is to get crystal clear by focusing on a target. And so for every meeting you go into, spending the first minute or two talking about what is the intention of the meeting, what do you need to get out of it, when you've done it well, what will it look like, and just really reset everyone's brain at the beginning of a meeting by talking about the objectives, the goals, the targets for just that particular meeting even. Because then the likelihood of the success in that meeting goes way up. Instead, people run into a room, people are late, no one's prepared, we talk about the same things over and over again, we don't follow up on what we agreed to last time, and sort of on and on it goes around that merry-go-round. So, even that's a simple one, to just build back in the space. When we find ourselves saying, that's the way we do things here, that's the way we've always done it, they won't go for that, whoever they is. There's another great prompt. That's a great prompt to change perspective, to, physically get up, go sit in another chair in the room, really try and think about your customer's perspective, your competitor's perspective, and bring that information into the room so that it expands people's thinking versus limits it. So like I said, we go through a long, long series, depending on what you're trying to achieve, of different triggers that are typical in a workday, and really try and set you up to just slow down just enough. What we don't teach is own-pull-up skepsis, and that's the art of staring at your navel. So we don't want you slowing down that much.
What was that term again?
Own-pull-up skepsis.
I've heard that before. Years ago, I've forgotten about that. Own-pull-up skepsis, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't want you slowing down that much, and we know that's really not possible. But we do want you, 30 seconds here and there, a minute here and there. Simple things like when you review your financials every month, you look at the same reports, same order, typically about the same time every month. So have your controller, your CFO, your bookkeeper give you a couple of questions to prompt your brain to look at that data in a new way. Ask yourself a question like, if our competitors were looking at this information right now, what would they see differently than me? And you would be stunned how simple. I mean, that takes 5 seconds to ask your brain that question, but it can really shift how you look at the information in front of you.
Interesting. I like that. Now, you wrote a book called Using Your Brain to Win that we talked about at the beginning of the interview. Talk about that book a little bit.
Well, that was just a real labor of love, and it's written in a very conversational and referenceable style with intention. So we start out just kind of explaining these thinking processes and some of the tricks and tips and traps that we have in our brain. And then it moves into something that is sort of at the core of everything we do, which is called destination modeling. And that goes to that neuro prompt around getting clear on winning, truly focusing on the target in every single thing you do. And particularly at a company level, as a business leader, what does winning look like for your company? Being able to define and describe that with specificity. And then once you've done that, we go through our methodology called Inform, Inspire, and Engage. How do you align and engage the entire organization so that everybody is running the same race? And we borrow with honor a lot of practices and principles and operating principles from elite players around the world, everything from United States Navy SEALs to Top Gun fighter pilots to world-class musicians, Olympic athletes, NFL referees. So we look at all of these people who are elite in what they do, unquestionably the best in what they do, and we say, what are they doing that we can learn and apply at work? And so that's woven throughout the book as well, because so often we spend more time working than we do anything else in our entire life, and we're in mediocre environments at best.
Earlier, you had said tips and traps in the brain. What are the traps in the brain? I'm interested to hear about that.
Well, there's a lot of fun things that our brain does that we don't recognize. The jumping to conclusions with very limited data, or discounting data, or looking to prove ourselves right, even when there's a preponderance of data to suggest we might not be, or confirming ourselves constantly, or looking back on the past year that was very successful and saying, oh yeah, we planned it that way, that hindsight bias. So we've got a list of about 300 different biases that we see that are fairly typical in the workplace, particularly as people think about the future and success, and really kind of learning about what some of those are. So again, when we find ourselves doing it, we can stop for 5 seconds and say, wait a minute, am I falling into this trap again?
There's a book by, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but it's called The Psychology of Persuasion. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, I sure do.
And I'll think of the author here in a minute, but there's a part in there where he talks about how people will hold on to an idea if they've expressed it verbally, even with a preponderance of proof that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And why do we do that brain-wise? Do you know, since you're the brain expert?
Because we love to prove ourselves right. And in fact, we are better at that than any other single thing we do as an adult human. We are constantly doing it. There are language precursors that indicate when we're doing it, when we say things like, isn't it so? Don't you think? Isn't it true that? It's obvious.
Yes, true.
Those are all great triggers that when we know that we're moving into proving ourselves right mode. And so we're set up to do that well as humans. And again, early as humans, it served us incredibly well. If we walked outside our cave and there was a saber-toothed tiger, we didn't have to rethink the process from the beginning. We have learned and we knew, that we should either get a really big stick or run very fast the other way. And it worked for us. And so, it does serve us well in a lot of different ways. We touch a hot stove. We know it's very hot. It burned us. We don't touch it again. Now, even when the stove cools off, maybe we don't touch it again. So we begin to over-rely on the things that work for us and constantly dig in to prove ourselves right.
Fascinating. Well, that's really awesome information. Now, how can somebody get a hold of you should they want to hear you speak or learn more?
We've got two different websites, thehumanfactor.biz and morethan-a-minute.com. And on morethan-a-minute.com, we do have a store there where we've got dozens and dozens of free or complimentary tools and white papers and tips and things like that. So I encourage listeners to please visit and, get anything that they think would be helpful to them. And of course, anyone can reach out. I have an abundance bubble. I do think there's more than enough to go around for all of us. So I'm always happy to share anything that I have, chat through an idea with someone, etc. So please don't hesitate to reach out. My email's on everything, and it's fairly easy to contact me.
Okay. Well, you heard that, folks. Reach out to Holly. Now, before I forget, that was Robert Cialdini who wrote that book, The Psychology of Persuasion.
Yeah, I'll tell you. There's another one that I strongly recommend people to read. It's a behavioral scientist who actually won the Nobel Prize in economics, and that's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And I swear I don't know Daniel personally or make any money by selling his book, but it does a phenomenal job from a neuroscience perspective. True neurosciences and behavioral sciences of really helping us to begin to understand a bit more about why we think and behave the way that we do.
Interesting. Well, I'm gonna take you up on that. Well, Holly, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and pulling back the curtain and showing us about your speaking business. That was great information.
You are most welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.